All right, so welcome everyone to this part of MYFest 2024. Today, Heather and I are going to talk to some of her student partners around the ideas of partnership and liberation and scholarship. Before we go ahead and do that, I'm going to start with the MYFest tradition of ensuring we go through our community agreement. So you can go ahead and see them on this slide. I'll read out the first four, but if you want to join in on them, add to them, or look at them in more detail, you can use either the link or the QR code. So the first four elements of the MYFest community agreement are: you are welcome here, regardless of race, ethnicity, gender identity, sexual orientation, ability, disability. All are welcome in this space. We make space for others, and we consider the different ways we might do that. We critique ideas, not people, and we assume positive intentions so that the intention of the conversations we have, we try and come to them with a generosity of spirit and discuss, as opposed to perhaps defend. As we go throughout the conversation today, if anyone needs any extra support in terms of being able to access any questions that are happening, or if you want a quick summary recap, please do feel free to drop me a direct message or put something into the chat, and all of that will be taken care of as quickly as possible. Thank you very much, and I'll stop sharing. So I'm very keen not to talk very much this time, Heather. So if it's okay, blah, blah, blah. If it's okay with you, I'll say who I am, and then I'll like hang out and just enjoy. So I'm Jennie Blake. I've been involved in things around student partnership and co-creation for the entirety of my career in education, which has now been very long. And I am particularly excited about today because, again, I get to listen and learn from some students that are part of one of Heather's activities. But yeah, I'm just going to hand off now to Heather and we'll start.
Sure. So I'll give some context for my involvement with Students as Partners work. I am the Assistant Director for Assessment and Experiential Learning at the Center. Oh gosh, see, I already just did it. I already just did it. I'm just so used to doing that. And you know what, Jennie, I think it's because I think that's what happened last time. When you introduced yourself, I was like, oh, let me introduce myself. Alice and Stephanie, I'm trying so hard to not associate myself with my institution for the purposes of this conversation. So let me start over. I've been doing Students as Partners work for almost as long as I have been PhD. I started when I was working in Delaware in a predominantly African-American and Latino-Latina community, and was in community centers doing digital storytelling work. And I continued this work and up until the current point. I have the wonderful opportunity to be able to work with students who are just the most amazing individuals. It's really the best part of the things that I do professionally. And Alice and Stephanie are joining us as people who are involved as well in Students as Partners work. And I guess I'll just ask y'all to introduce yourselves.
Should I go first?
Yes.
Okay. Good morning, everyone. I'm super excited to be here. Thank you so much, Heather, for inviting me. I come into this work after sort of spending 6 years in the nonprofit sector. I was doing a lot of facilitation with communities on the ground. And organizing with communities on the ground and learning a lot about the power of facilitation and experiential learning, and just really saw the power of what happens when communities come together and really support each other in times of need. Fast forward, coming into UT, I just felt really inspired by just the remarkable students that were here and the potential that they had, but feeling like, oh gosh, we could really be learning in different ways. And we could really be holding care in classrooms in ways that I have yet to really witness in scales that I'd love to see. And so a large part of my pedagogy sort of pulls from thinking about the ways that we can decolonize our classrooms, think about ways that we can restructure our learning environments. And that brought me to Heather and working with these really incredible students and thinking about ways that we can sort of transform that. So that's enough about me. But I'm just I'm a little scatterbrained. I'm in the midst of moving. I apologize if I seem a little out of sorts today. But I'm so excited to be here and really humbled to be learning from you all.
Hello, I'm Stephanie Tran. I'm currently a rising junior at the University of Texas at Austin. I'm a psychology major with a minor in CS as well as like Korean language. I am joining this meeting today as a person, as I mentioned earlier, to participate in like student-led conversations. I'm also currently an intern at the CTL, doing just research on like the second year student experience. And yeah, I don't have as much to say, but I am also very excited to be here today and to be able to participate in this conversation.
So I guess this is a really interesting moment because Alice and Stephanie are at the end of a consultancy experience. And so in some ways, this is sort of a really reflective moment, doubly so for us. And I guess Stephanie and Alice, this experience that you're in notwithstanding, what hopes do you have for how people who are in teaching roles can include students as partners in their learning? And do you have some examples of what that looks like when it sort of is the thing that you hope it could be?
I guess when I hear like, what are my biggest hopes for how teachers and researchers could define students as partners, right?
Mhm.
I just hope that the teachers and researchers are able to see students as like equal collaborators. Um, I think it's really important that in order to collaborate with one another, that we're seen as equals and that we ensure that students' voices and opinions are just heard and respected by teachers and researchers. Just because like having their opinions valued will make them want to participate in the conversation more, is what I believe. I also kind of think that like in saying that it's important that students are able to somehow um participate or like are actively involved in like the curriculum design. Um, just because these are the students that you are going to be teaching to. So I think it's kind of important that like, well, everyone has different learning styles, right? But I think it's important to be able to cater to that specifically to the individual or like the student. Just because yes, everyone does have different learning styles. Yeah.
One of the things that I've been thinking a lot about is and this kind of sounds weird to say it, and maybe y'all can help me think of a different way to describe it. But a lot of times formal learning environments are not spaces where students have the power of consent. for lack of a better word. So a lot of times, as a student or when we're students, we really don't have the opportunity to say, no, I don't want to do that. I mean, we might, like, in micro moments within a learning experience, that are kind of very situated and boundaried, but there's not an overall opportunity to an understanding that you would just disagree and be able to voice that disagreement with something that you are being asked to do. And I'm thinking about this in particular because of the work that Stephanie and I have done together. And we had this really great conversation. I felt like it was great. I don't know if you felt like it was great, Stephanie, but I was so excited by it because of the way that, we were able to voice different ideas about what we were trying to accomplish. And I'm wondering, Stephanie, what that felt like for you, and have you had opportunities to kind of have that kind of conversation um, in other spaces?
Yeah, is this like pertaining to the conversation we had like last week with Shiva?
Yes, yes. Can you
Okay,
say a little bit about it?
yeah, basically what we had discussed in that meeting, it was between me and Heather and also a grad student working here at the CTL. Um, it was kind of, we discussed like the work that I had been doing and pertaining to like the interviews that I had been conducting, and we were kind of just discussing like um I guess, how do you say it, the implications of like the research and what actually mattered when hearing about our research in regards to like students. And I think we had a few like clashing viewpoints about how we were going along with the interviews or what actually had mattered within our research. Like, for example, we had examples of like, it was like a different schools, a different universities, like mapping of how students are able to plan out their 4 years and just like, so we would look at examples of those and then kind of just discuss, oh, what in this 4 year degree plan actually matters and what kind of things did we see in that research that we didn't have in our own. And I think there were a few conflicting viewpoints, although I can't recall exactly. I just have to look through like my notes really quickly.
Or maybe that's a good thing,
Yeah.
honestly. That it was just sort of an organic part of our conversation. I can
Mhm.
say I was really like I was present in the conversation, but then I was also thinking about like how do I make space
Yeah.
for you?
Yeah, for sure. I think when I did experience that, I was a little bit scared because I had never been in a space in which I could speak up as much as I did. And I was kind of afraid to be like met with criticism or just like, oh, she's a student intern, or just like not having my opinions valued, as we were kind of discussing earlier about like wanting to see students as equal partners for teachers and researchers. But they did create a space in which I did feel very comfortable sharing those kinds of opinions. And afterwards, like it was a really new feeling for me because afterwards I ended up apologizing. I was like, yeah, I'm so sorry that like in this meeting, we kind of had conflicting viewpoints, but we ensured that like, oh, it felt like we were equal partners participating in the conversation equally. So yeah.
Alice, a minute ago, you looked like you were about to say something, but okay, okay. So another question that I have for you is actually inspired by Alice. Alice passed along some interesting facts about Octavia Butler a few days ago. And there is a partial quote that folks often call up about change. And the partial quote is, all that you touch, you change. All that you change, changes you. And I'm wondering what we all think about what kinds of change are possible through students as partners work, or what kinds of change we would like to see through students as partners work.
I wondered if it was all right while y'all are thinking, just because I was only just talking with some students I work with about this, and because Stephanie mentioned feeling safe to talk. And we talked about one of the most important things is not necessarily what you can do in the partnership, but what they've done in the previous one, so that you're not all retreading the same path, like asking for permission again to speak in a session, being looked at like you value, like all of that kind of stuff can and sometimes needs to happen like over and again because you're an individual. But a lot of the work that can happen, here's Kira's little tiny head, a lot of the work that can happen can sort of pave the way a little bit, and then give more scope and space, for people who've come before. We were just talking about like longevity in partnership and how to advocate for that kind of thing. You made me think of it.
Alice, I'm kind of wondering about, so, I've had the opportunity to come to the class that you have taught previously, which was amazing. And, as a doctoral student, who may be in instructional roles in the future, I'm wondering how you think about change through your work with students in your classrooms as you are a student yourself.
That's such a good question. Because I think being a graduate student is sort of feels like you're constantly being mapped in a pecking order on an institutional level. You're told, oh, you should teach or lead these students that are paying an exorbitant amount of tuition dollars, and you just you just don't want to fail. You want to help give them the experience that they deserve, and really support them, and I guess just being who they want to be, and being a part of the future that they want to be a part of. And at the same time, you're constantly being told to be learning, and you're learning from professors, on top of trying to teach. And so you kind of get the experience of being both a student and not a student, and it sort of feels often like I'm undulating a bit in an ocean between having agency in a classroom and then not having agency as a student in a learning environment. And I think one of the key things that I want to sort of hold on to is just maybe there's an assumption, right, that that undergraduate students have the most to learn, that they are these empty vessels coming into a university and they need mentorship. And golly, have they mentored me? And I think part of that is sort of combating the punitive learning systems that we were all ingrained into. And this is by no ways their fault, right? Or my fault, but it's just sort of, I've had students who raise their hand to ask to go to use the restroom, right? That's the learning environment that we come from. You have to ask permission, because there's no trust. There's an assumption that if you don't show up on time, that you're not learning. There's an assumption that you have to earn my trust, right? That your worth is determined on whether I could remember your name, or whether a professor remembers your name. And really what I guess really what I'd want is for students to just feel that they could be vulnerable in a classroom, because I think that's really where the learning happens, where they could play and feel really comfortable in their bodies, physically, mentally, emotionally. And that really allows them to learn across differences, allows them, I think, and me, right, to learn, to kind of let go of assumptions and to build relationship. I don't know if that answers the question, but I think as a graduate student, I feel that I'm very privileged to have that position.
Thank you. That was so lovely. I really appreciate it. Alice, if I could ask you one more question, like for right now, just because I know. Oh, yeah, sir. Why don't you go? Why don't you go?
No, please go ahead with asking a question first.
Oh,
I'm
okay.
fine waiting.
Okay.
I was just gonna add something to what Alice mentioned, because it's
Well, then
very
you should go. You
relatable.
should go then. Yeah.
Because
Well,
it's very relatable to me, but I want to respect the space as well
no,
and let
please,
you.
please.
So
I'll remember.
basically,
I'll
and
remember.
I totally agree with everything that was said here, and I think from my experience as someone who also oscillates between the two experiences of being a student and of having a role in center for learning and teaching and all that, I think the reason for all of this is that the education now and the system that we're dealing with is a bit quantifiable, in the sense that we have to give grades, not us as students or people who share the two experiences, but at the end of the semester, you have to have a grade. Either you yourself or the professor should give a grade. And because of this, there's no still the central focus on restorative justice or the inequities that is present within the classrooms is not really prioritized. And therefore, I think that's why we're dealing with these sort of dilemma or complications within our space that doesn't value learning and agency and partnership and authentic learning and being present as you are and all this. So there has to be some prerequisites that students are working on to just show themselves to professors. Thank you.
Thank you for sharing that answer. Yes, absolutely. Hi, Shiva.
Hi, Dr. Wright.
How are you?
I'm doing great. How are you?
I am doing really well. Thank you so much for joining us this morning for the conversation. We're just really having a pretty free-flowing conversation about different aspects of being a part of students as partners work. I almost feel like we need to have a different name for it that normalizes the kind of connection and collaboration that we want to see, because I almost feel like to call it students as partners work, I don't know, there's some weird energy around that, and I'm not sure what to do with that or how we could frame what we're doing a little bit differently to sort of capture the values and the conceptual framework that's at the heart of it. Jennie, what do you think about that?
I was just thinking it's so interesting because I think when whatever vocabulary we use, like the language we decide to use, automatically influences the outcome. And student partnership, it's such a university phrase, and it's not one students ever use, right? Like, they don't go around being like, I am part of a student staff partnership, and unless we've told them, unless like we've trained them to speak that way. And I think that there's a lot of use in teaching people about the vocabulary and sort of underlying ways to navigate universities. But at the same time, when you said, I feel uncomfortable, I wonder if there is an element where that allows you to move away from pedagogy and it becomes almost operational. Like, well, how are you demonstrating it? And what are you measuring? And I know for you, because we've had these chats and for me as well, almost all of my work in partnership is because that's how I teach. Like
Yes.
I teach in partnership. I co-create learning with my students. But I also do that with like animals I happen to own. Like my children are that I treat everyone the same. It's always from the same kind of pedagogical root and a set of values. And you said that, and I thought, oh, when we silo it off as like something you can put on a pamphlet or like a separate initiative, we do two things. We kind of divorce ourselves from maybe what's driving us to behave that way, and we excuse those who aren't doing it because it's like it's an option. Like if you have a special little thing that happens somewhere else, that means that like maybe it's just special there and not actually everyone should be doing this. So for me, I thought, well, it's just learning on some level. People learn best in community. We are social animals. This is just learning. We're trying to remove the barriers to learning by acknowledging that it really is a partnership. It's something that happens collectively. So yeah, I loved it, and that it's always good to put pressure on places where they prefer to not do that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Shiva, would you like to just briefly introduce yourself for Yasser and Jennie?
Absolutely. Hi, Jennie and Yasser. I'm Shiva. I'm a second year student in the master's program here at UT Austin at LBJ School of Public Affairs. I'm doing global policy studies as my major, and I'm almost about to graduate. And then I joined the research of second year experience program with Dr. Wright starting in May. And then, yeah, I've been since working on developing the project deliverables and like kind of the framework which we'll adopt for the next academic year. And then it has been great learning in this space and then working in this space. And yeah, that's a little bit about me.
Lovely to meet you, Shiva.
Lovely to meet you as well. Yeah, it's really nice to meet you here today. Yes, UT is University of Texas at Austin. That's correct. Yes.
Jennie had a great question that she put in our list of questions, and I'll just read it. One definition of liberation is the act or process of freeing someone or something from another's control. The act of liberating someone or something. In what ways is this possible or impossible in work that involves including students as partners? Maybe I thought of that question. I don't know. Was it me? Oh, that's funny. I think
I was
that's
like, no, I have the
our...
follow-up one. I have the follow-up one.
Okay. All right. So I'll read it one more time. One definition of liberation is the act or process of freeing someone or something from another's control. The act of liberating someone or something. In what ways is this possible or impossible in work that involves including students as partners? And this is a really challenging question for me because I'm in constant conversation with myself about issues of power and control in different kinds of spaces, especially when I might be the one who is perceived as having power and control. And so maybe this question is really just about power and how that manifests. or is addressed in work that in which there are students working with folks who are not formally students. So if y'all have any thoughts about, power and relationships of power in any of the work that you've been involved in, I'd love to know what you think.
I guess kind of just wanted to hop in and say something a little bit small here, but I definitely think that it is challenging in terms of the definition of liberation, just because there is a hierarchy in like academic structures, and it's a very rigid, like, I guess, kind of structure, and that it like can limit student agency, as Alice was kind of discussing earlier. And I feel like it's only possible to give students, like, it is only possible in work that involves including students as partners when students are given that like authority in their own educational journey. Although I find it difficult to find examples of that, just because within my own personal experiences, I have experienced like that kind of hierarchical like structure, as I mentioned before. But yeah.
It strikes me that coming back to the idea of trust and openness and vulnerability, like those are such important qualities for a person who has the institutional power to include in their interactions, because I feel like I've been a part of, I feel like I've been a part of instructional situations where I'm the student and the person who's facilitating learning would say, I want everybody to feel free to, express their ideas and their opinions and da, 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 da. And then, I'm thinking, oh, okay. And then there's something that happens, and the expression of the opinion that I have or the perspective that I have is then policed, which is the fear, right? That if you do step out from under someone's control, it won't actually be real. And you're sort of doubly penalized if and when that happens. Does that make sense to y'all?
I was thinking about the doubly penalized part that you said. If you could just talk a little bit more about that, what do you meant there?
So I guess there's the immediate embodied experience of feeling sort of chastised. And also, I think it might feed into sort of imposter syndrome, because then, I know I in the past have started to like self-talk and say, I should have known. Like I should have known that that was a thing that wasn't really a thing, And so I think maybe the double penalty is sort of more the embodiment of that, and also the way that it shapes how I think as well.
Mhm. Thank you for building on that. Like, thank you. And then when you asked that question initially, I was thinking about this was past summer when I did this internship with Global Health Action, and we spent a considerable amount of time on this literature, pedagogy of oppressed. And then so that was eye-opening for me. Like it might be very intuitive, very much out there that it happens, but when we spend considerable amount of time on it, and then that's when I realized like how it's just trapped in the system. Once you are oppressed at some point in time, then you tend to do the same when you get into power. So that's how the cycle is repeating. And then that was interesting to like learn in such depth. Yeah, that was my experience about like the power structure and like how they're.
Yes, for sure, for sure.
Heather, I wondered if the students could, and you all have individual voices. I'm not implying you have the same voice about this, but I was wondering about your perspective. I wondered if some of this as well is the fact that although we try to break down perhaps our pedagogical practice, you're still kind of forced to compete against each other as students. You're depending on things, how things are marked, which is, I'm in the UK, so how things are graded, depending on how the modules, your courses are set up, depending on how much time you have. There's without the construction of the module you engage with also being almost like a revelatory module, right? You can read Pedagogically Oppressed, and I was thinking ironically of the first class I read that for, which was incredibly hierarchical. Like we were being lectured at about this particular book, and I thought, well, no wonder I didn't really engage with it. Like and so I was wondering from the student perspective was like if some of that discomfort you feel, you were talking as well about like feeling like you're swaying between two oceans or in an ocean, is the fact that you're being presented with an opportunity that looks like it's liberation, but you're still inside the same system. And maybe the partnership work we're talking about, we need to acknowledge that in some way. So I was just wondering. Also, like, I'm deeply enjoying being with Americans again because you all nod. So people in the UK, not so much nodding, not so much nodding. There's like much less audience like, yes, I get it. Yeah, I'm with you. And much more like, I'm just gently and politely listening, which is, it's cool. I got used to it, but like, oh, this is nice.
I wonder if we might all be interested in sharing moments in our learning process where we felt the freest and the most liberated. For me, those times have often also incorporated literal physical movement. So in the past, when I've been doing work in community centers with students who are part of a university, when we were able to get out into the neighborhoods and just walk together and talk about the work that we were doing and experiences that they had in their neighborhoods. And I don't know, there's just something about moving or like being in different spaces that seemed to create more possibility for freedom and trust and creativity also, and risk taking. But that's just me. Do y'all are there experiences that come to mind for you when you think about, learning spaces where you felt the most free? And if you could share those, I would love to know what those were.
Just have a follow-up questions on that. So like by learning spaces, do you mean during our college journeys or do you mean
I
overall?
think it could
Like,
be anything. I think it could be anywhere. Yeah.
thank you. I could go if, Alice, go ahead, please. Go ahead. Okay, I'll give you a second, no worries. Yeah, I think this, I totally resonate with what you just said, okay? Like going out in the spaces and actually talking to people, changes perspective a lot. Not just the perspective, but makes me free as well. Like, so in the past, I've worked in spaces where, like, say, we were in this space which is deciding about the policy for this rest of the district, let's say, or like for this n number of people. And then the best part that I enjoyed ever there and felt most free was when I actually go into the villages or like talk to people on community. Hey, what's happening? Or like talk to them, connect with them, and then not from a perspective that, hey, I'm here to solve the problems, but from the perspective that what's actually the reality. And then bring it back to these power structures where all the decisions are being made, and then try to incorporate that in somehow. And then the second instance that I could think of is when trust was placed in me. Like, say, in this like setup where there are obviously powerful people sitting, or let's say in a meeting, or like in a space where we're making some decisions. So when enough trust was put in me that, hey, yes, even though you might not be at that level in terms of seniority, but we respect your perspective, or we respect the space where you're coming from, and then we actually are going to like take that into consideration, not just to make you feel heard. So I think those are the spaces where and there definitely are spaces where you're actually given that space. And for that matter, that happened in the meeting with art as well. I felt that there, that yes, even though I'm a student who joined like this project maybe a month ago, but yeah, so I think actually giving the students the part in the decision making process, that make me felt like the most free and like, yeah, heard.
This is sort of related to what Shiva says. I think some of the most powerful, and this also goes back to what you were saying, because something that you said, Heather, about policing really hit me, because I think that there's something about the ways that we treat each other like cops in classrooms is actually really tangibly felt. And it's not always conscious, but there's always this like this notion of power and hierarchy that that I think is just, that can be very viscerally seen and experienced by a lot of students, and more so from students of color. And I can go on and on about that. In terms of sort of thinking about that, I like some of the most transformative learning environments were when I was doing direct action trainings. I think there's something about being with people from different movements who are learning about creative ways to disrupt power. And they're coming together and they're learning to climb, they're learning to blockade, they're learning to build art things, and all in an effort to really go up against what feels like an impossible monster at time, but learning to navigate that together. And where I see this in the classroom is, I think, where it brings me the most joy, because I think there are moments where it can be playful and liberatory and heavy and emotional, and those can live together at once. And like one of my favorite moments was I had my students practice being interviewers, and oh my gosh, I just learned so much from them in this moment. But they ended up just roasting me the whole time on the spot. And it was a bit uncomfortable at first. And I was like, this is great. This is actually really beautiful collaborative teamwork that's challenging a power system that's really humbling. And some of the students were like, this is really cathartic. And some of them were like, I feel bad about doing this. And we were able to unpack the layers of that and how they were working together and why. And so I think, this might be a little bit of like a maybe like selfish of me. But when I get to see them challenge power, that feels like going exactly against being the cop in the classroom or challenging the cops that are in the classroom, whether they're in our head, right? Like we want to kill the cops in our head, or whether they're just practiced because we're just so socially ingrained into it. And I think that kind of level of engagement and that kind of level of care in a classroom that can be built, I think that's the kind of thing that can change worlds.
Does anyone else have a particular memory or situation that comes to mind when you think about times when you felt the most free as a learner? Sure, yeah, yes, sir.
Well, I would say something general, not really a personal experience. So I would just say I always feel empowered slash free when I am always included in the discussion, when I always have a space to say, okay, I believe that this is more effective, when I say, oh, I think that's good, but I disagree with this and that. So it's always wonderful to feel that you're heard, but at the same time to feel that whatever you do is also actionable, not transactional. And by actionable, I mean that something is acted upon, something that is implemented, that is well well taken by whoever is in place. And then, you know, that you feel that, okay, I'm proud to have done this or to have done that.
Yes.
Thank you for sharing that. Yeah, sir. Like that resonates very well. And just on a positive note, I want to say this. Like, I come from India, like, and then the teaching structure there is very different from what we have in the US here, right? And then, so when I first started studying here, like 2 years back, so the kind of, I would say there is a freedom to a certain degree in the classrooms here, right? And then that might not be the case in other parts of the world. And then it is not a looking down upon any other part of the world per se, but then it's just how things have worked, right? And then again, I always notice the pros and cons of that. And then so in India, the teacher is always like, in that respectful position that, hey, guru, like respectful position. So then oftentimes I saw that there was not a room for such a free discussion or open like disagreement from the student side. But then I saw that happening in the classrooms in the US very frequently, and then it was much more free to do that, and that felt liberating because it actually felt like, hey, I'm learning. I'm just not like listening to the teacher here or like the professor and then whatever they think is right. Like in the con side was like some students might not be like really interested in point of actually disagreeing with the professor, but just for the sake of it, that because you can say you can disagree and just disagreeing. So yeah, I mean, but yeah, I felt that that kind of freedom exists more in the classrooms in the US than is where I came from. Just on a positive note, I want to add that.
I think I was trying to think about this because I went through a really standard American schooling experience. But the 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 time I felt most or more liberated, I went from like quite a rigid, rich seventh grade experience where I didn't fit in at all and it all felt very confusing. And then I moved to a massive, sort of open, very, if you've seen any video, any like American movie from the 90s where there's a homecoming event, I went to that high school. And there were so many students there. So I went from a school that had 700 total across like 6 grades to one that had 3,000, which ended up being twice as many as the university I went to. So it was huge. And then the part of town I lived in was where all the Mexican American students were living. So I was on the bus with all of these students, and we were the bused-in crowd. And so I was also part of a different outside group because of who I was hanging out with. And I think at that point, I was just like, this is so much better. I'm not part of this weird system where everyone's kind of pre-deciding this is how you behave. They all went to classes about behavior, like fancy behavior, and that kind of thing. I was part of a group where it was just they were kind of defining themselves in a way, and but there were enough of us that felt safe. You know, we weren't too isolated, and that time I remember thinking, I remember feeling more confident in class because I wasn't the outsider as much anymore. I felt like I could understand the system. And I wondered, thinking about that, whether some element of liberation is having confidence the system isn't at least actively working against you. Because that's what I was hearing a little bit when Alice was talking, like just this awareness that we are navigating these hostile systems and how difficult it is to work in partnership towards liberation, you know, depending on the amount of agency you have over what you're inhabiting and how tiring and kind of that's like an additional burden to bear. So when you can have some faith that the system itself is at least, if not, not actively malignant, it was probably as good as it got was like towards neutral. It wasn't fantastic, but it was big enough that nobody noticed you in particular, right? You didn't feel singled out. And that felt like a gift. So I wonder if there's like a little bit of that too, like you just don't have to spend your whole time constantly looking over your shoulder.
I'm just thinking about so many things right now. I'm thinking about being in learning spaces where the folks who are responsible for, you know, creating those spaces or leading them have said to a group of students, like, do whatever you want because, you know, in some sense, it's too late for you. Like, you know, it doesn't really matter what you do because you are not in this group of students that we consider to be successful in some kind of way. And sometimes, like, just as a person facilitating learning, I felt the most free in those spaces, which is it's a weird interrelation to structures of power. And I don't know if I have any thoughts about other than that, but I often think about that kind of dynamic and what that's about and what to do with that dynamic. So another quote with a question. Audre Lorde says that without community, there is no liberation, only the most vulnerable and temporary armistice between an individual and her oppression. So I'll repeat that quote. Without community, there is no liberation, only the most vulnerable and temporary armistice between an individual and her oppression. So the question is, how might partnerships between staff and students create community? And what do we need to consider as we make that effort? I guess like within that question is like, okay, so what is community? And Alice, I just really want to say how impressed I am with the work that you've been doing to facilitate groups of researchers who are students. And I'm wondering if you can say a little bit about how you approach structuring that work and what you want to have happen based on the way that you are going about things.
I mean, I think the great Audre Lorde says this, which is vulnerability. I think that just feels like such a, I mean, I think the most important learning comes within being vulnerable. I think in our institutions, we're often bubbled into our own little glass palace of imagined communities, right? Like our campus community and the communities within the campus community. And I think well, I think it's important to recognize the communities outside of that, right? There are going to be people and experiences and stories that we all encounter outside of the classroom. When you leave the classroom, you're part of different communities. When you graduate from college, you're going to be a part of different communities. And so I guess there's something about thinking about who you want to be in community. It's sort of, I think, when I try and build relationships with students, I'm curious not just about the work that we'll do together, but I'm curious about who they are as a human. I'm curious about who they want to become and why, and what keeps them up at night. I genuinely, I mean, I genuinely care because that's how I want to be heard and thought of and cared for by them. And I think it's sort of weird to sort of think students of partners, because I'm thinking of the work I'm doing with Sam, and Sam is coming over tomorrow to get like all of this furniture out of my house. And I'm just thinking, like, I'm really glad that we've built that relationship. That I'm learning about your family, that I'm learning about the ways that you learn, that I'm seeing how Sam is can be maybe hard on herself in ways that I have been, and how can we learn about those things together? How can I be supportive of the swimming practice and the struggles and the wins, and so I think that there's I think it's just about learning to be human, and learning to sort of be open to being humbled about that.
Yasser's asked a question, and I want to respect that, but I also am really curious because Stephanie and Shiva work together, and so I'm wondering about that partnership as well. But Yasser, I want to read your question.
Yeah, please go ahead and continue.
Yeah.
I'm just using the chat to
Yeah.
put my thoughts, because all the thoughts here are so brilliant and wonderful, and just wanna make sure that also we respect the time and everybody's thoughts. So please go ahead and include others' voices as well.
Okay. Well, we won't forget what you put in the chat. So Shiva and Stephanie, so y'all have been working in partnership with each other. What are some things that you would want me or other people to know about the work you've been doing that can maybe facilitate future partnerships between students in the future? Yeah.
I guess I kind of just wanted to say that although I know that me and Shiva's relationships isn't as close as like me being able to move furniture at his house or anything like that, But I did want to say that
It
throughout
goes the other way, or
my
me moving furniture to you.
oh
Sorry.
yeah, very good. Um, but yeah, I did want to say that like throughout the duration of my internship and my time here with the CTL, I definitely like created a relationship and that we have a mutual respect for each other as professional partners and just as individuals. And we have a shared goal of working in the CTL. And by working together, we just built this kind of supportive environment where everyone's contributions and opinions are valued. And I think the way that we achieve that is that we kind of like really prioritized open communication with each other, just kind of updating each other every week or like every day, just on what task we were doing. And yeah, I think just kind of keeping that open is really important.
Thank you, Stephanie. Thank you for saying that. Like, I think adding to that, and I was thinking about the community question also that you asked earlier, and then yeah, I've never like, to be honest, like it was a very different experience for me, because I've never worked with, because just the whole US education system is new for me, and even as such, how students are thinking here is new for me. I was going through that process of learning that over the 2 years. So then, as redundant it might sound, because I'm saying this again and again, where it is different. It is way different for international students when the context is so different from like the countries that they are coming from and then in which they are right now. So in that space, to be able to work with, yeah, like a student who is like, say, I'm in grad student, almost like finishing my grad school, and then also I've had some work experience before, and then Stephanie is in her sophomore year right now, and then so even just to navigate that difference, and then and also given the contextual difference and all of that stuff, so it was great learning. And I think what I would say for future teams that are being made, it's okay to be uncomfortable. Like if we're making such groups where people might get a little uncomfortable, I think that's the best thing. And given that people are ready to work on that, given the two people or like more than that, whoever are in the team are looking at it from a perspective of learning, that maybe as a lead or doctorate, like if you want to use another term, maybe you can assess that, hey, if they're looking at it as an opportunity or they're just shutting down. If they're shutting down, then maybe not. But if they are using it as an opportunity to learn, which I want to believe I did in my case, or Stephanie did in her case, then it's a great opportunity. Like, yeah, because I kind of wrote in our memo also that, yeah, it took us some time to build that communication and that, that sort of free flowing communication. But then, yeah, it's great that that happened. And yeah, and then quickly jumping back to the community question, I think the community always like, or I don't want to mix it. It's okay. Yeah, I think let's go on this trail. Yeah.
So to come back to Yasser's question to Alice about defining care, how do you define care, Alice? And this is a question for anybody.
That's hard. There's maybe there's a sense of a duty to care that I have to the people that I learn with. I have I pulled up this calendar because it has a quote that made me want to think about it, and it's by Ursula K. Le Guin, and it's love doesn't just sit there like a stone, it has to be made like bread, remade all the time and made new. And I guess I never want to be part of a learning environment that doesn't sort of center that kind of love and care, that we always have to and this sort of kind of goes back to the change, right? Love doesn't just sit there like a stone. When Octavia Butler is saying, all that we touch, we change. All that we change changes you. The only lasting truth is change. God is change. I'm just always reminded that we have to always be remaking care. We always have to be remaking love. It's always something that comes with change. And yeah, and I think, Yasser, you're bringing up something really important, right? Which is when we're being broad about care, when we're being unspecific, we can often reduce it to something that is meaningless, or maybe even weaponized, right? When institutions are like, we care for our students, and our multicultural centers are places where we can care for one another, or we're like family in the classroom, and I'm like, well, what makes me buy that? What makes me feel safe in that? You have to earn my trust. You have to earn that sort of like commitment from me. And I see, oh yeah, I'm seeing what you're writing. Yes, sir. Yeah. And I think that, and I'm also thinking about the ways in which disability justice has brought us into a whole new conversation around care. When we talk about like our bodies and the access it has and the access it doesn't have, and when it doesn't. But I guess a lot of it for me is constantly having to make it anew, like bread remade all the time, and made new again.
Thank you.
I'll just end it there.
Thank you. It's just, for me, it is upsetting that when you look up care on the internet with the incognito or private browsing, so your cookies doesn't affect the search, you'd mostly find it very basic, crudely stupid, in the sense that care is understood from the healthcare, like nursing and healthcare aspect, where it has a lot of perspective. So that's why I just wanted to venture into this more, and because I'm just trying to unpack this a lot, and I'm always thinking in my research even interests, how can I put care on top of every aspect of what I'm doing, and every sort of every now and again I revise my understanding, and I try to develop it as much as possible. And I, like a year ago, I actually wrote about care. I researched care and I wrote about it. And now I, every day when I read what I wrote, I always say, oh, if I'm rewriting this, I'm gonna actually, like, I'm gonna dash it all out and just throw it in the bin, and just rewrite it again in a completely different way. And I know that it's so hard. It's so hard just to think that your perspectives are changing and evolving this quickly. So thank you.
Yes, sir. You made me think too about how care needs to be a deliberate act, like something you commit to. And in order to commit to something, you need to understand on some level what it is. And so, sorry, this is the balloon. It's now entering the chat. And in order to understand, you need to like really think and consider, and perhaps put more effort in than looking up its definition on the internet. And so I think it's really interesting that we've moved from liberation, which is often where we feel we must put our efforts, right, to care, which is going back to that relational, pedagogical community element. Sorry, balloon is very distracting. So I just really appreciate you bringing that up, because think it might have been, at least in my head, one of those things that you just sort of assume is part of what you do without considering.
So I have one more question for us before we begin to conclude. And that is a pretty basic one. Just what does courage look like for you specifically when it comes to students as partners work, either as a student or someone who's facilitating the work? What does courage look like in this moment for you?
It's a big question, and I think how I'm navigating it is putting yourself through the situation, even it might feel uncomfortable, or like daunting at first. So there are often situations that I'm encountering these days when I feel like, oh, I might not be so valued there in this situation, or my opinion might not be so valued in this particular context, but I go for it still. I'm like, no, I'm not stopping just because of these thoughts, and it ends up being rewarding. So that's courage for me these days.
Yeah. Yeah. Stephanie, Jennie, Yasser, what does courage look like for you in this moment?
So I think I'm going to look at it from two perspectives, because I've got quite a bit of sort of institutional clout is the wrong word, but agency, institutional agency. So me being courageous looks like I think it's easier for me. So part of being courageous, I think, or part of courage is people understanding the ask, like what it means to do what someone is doing in the context that they're doing it, and being generous with your like relationship building in that context, like never saying, oh, that's not enough, they should be doing more, without really considering what it is you're doing, and belittling someone's effort. So I think there's a lot to do with context and effort. And then in general, for me, courage is also about, I liked how Alice brought up Ursula K. Le Guin, just every day getting up and deciding to remake the bread is astonishing. That's an astonishing amount of courage. That is effort, and that is commitment, and that is on some level deciding to put community on equal parity with the individual. And none of that is inherent in the systems we operate in. So it's taking those small, elegant steps, to think of Adrienne Marie Brown, as a collective. I think courage looks better when it's people together, or when it's building that togetherness.
Thanks, Jenny. I was just gonna bring the biomimicry model from Adrienne Marie Brown's Emergent Strategy book, and I think for me, courage is the fractals that she mentions in her book, the idea of small things having to do with the big things, and linking all these to the idea that you're able to advocate for everything, regardless of its portion or its sort of effect on you or the whole kind of project or design that you're working on. So yeah, I'm just, I second all your thoughts and I really agree with them, and yes, thank you.
Stephanie, do you have thoughts? It's okay if you don't. You can put in the chat if
I had thoughts. I guess to say themselves is courage, because I was just kind of listening in on how eloquently like everyone else speaks, and I'm like, oh, I really need to like think about how I'm gonna formulate and like articulate my words. But that's courage itself, right? It's just being able to speak out. But yeah, I would say that courage for me in this moment is just really not only like echoing what everyone else says, but just being able to take initiative in such like a position where I am a student, taking initiative in a space where it could be a majority of like professionals versus like a student. I think being able to take initiative, it shows courage because like you put yourself forward and you're willing to take the risk of like not only leading but also like failing. Um, Especially in a space where like there's like a hierarchy, as I was saying earlier. Um, I also think that just being able to build like trusting relationships with others takes a lot of courage because there are moments where I think like, oh, like maybe teamwork, working collaboratively, that can be difficult for me sometimes because um you just want to be able to have that autonomy over your own kind of work, but it takes a lot of courage to be able to trust in others, and to like build mutual respect between students and educators, because it requires like honest communication and just a willingness to understand each other.
For sure, for sure. I think for me in this moment, courage looks like resisting the sort of back to normalness that we're feeling still in the aftermath of the pandemic and quarantine. I think there was additional time that was allowed for people to think and process and be. And the impulse now is to take that time away. As a matter of fact, like not just take it away, but we have to move faster, even faster. And I think courage for me right now looks like voicing the fact that the kind of work that we're doing should be, not should, requires time because we're both creating something and also creating something that is often in opposition to accepted ways of being. And that time, that creative energy really has to be honored and respected, but it has to be voiced first before it can be honored and respected. So I think for me right now, courage looks like just speaking back against how we're being asked to think about time. And speaking of time, we are out of it for this particular conversation. But I would be more than happy to work with Yasser and Jennie to make sure that we all stay connected if you want to continue the opportunity to chat. Heather, thank you so much for being generous with our stopping time. And I just wish you all a very, very lovely rest of your day.